here we have this phenomenally sophisticated information processor, which is the cell. Am I really to believe that that information processing capacity simply came about by the laws of nature and random processes without a mind?
Yes.
Well,
absolutely.
I find that impossible to believe as a mathematician.
I know you do. This is called the argument from personal incredulity. Yes, I mean, obviously complex things exist and brains exist.
Well,
and
why
brains
can
are
I not
complex.
look at the universe, the whole show, which includes
Well,
Dawkins and Lennox?
I'll tell you why. Because my brain that produced a book has an explanation in its own right. That explanation is evolution. We go back and back and back to the origin of the universe. That provides an explanation for complex brains, and complex brains produce books and museums and cars and computers. Of course we have complex things that produce other complex things, but science has an explanation for where complex brains come from in terms of simple beginnings.
I don't think it has at all.
The whole point of Darwinian natural selection is that it works without design, without foresight,
But that's
without
an
guidance.
assumption.
No, it's not an assumption. That is exactly how it works. Before Darwin came along, it looked perfectly obvious that even if evolution happened, there must be some guiding force to tell animals or plants how they ought to evolve. Natural selection is a blind force. The things that survive, survive. With hindsight, we can see that the ones that survive are the ones that are good at surviving. They have the genes that make them survive. Simon Conway Morris would not deny that. He's got some kind of, well, actually, I rather share his view of convergent evolution. We both of us are perhaps on the extreme end of Darwinians in that we emphasize the power of natural selection to home in on particular ends. Particularly, if you look around the museum, you'll see animals, marsupial animals from Australia that uncannily resemble non-marsupial animals, and Simon and I are both extremely keen on that. But that's produced by natural selection, as he would say. Natural selection is a mechanical, blind, automatic force. It's not, I can't say it's not guided, but there's no need for it to be guided. The whole point is that it works without guidance.
But it could be guided. Or do you completely shut that out?
I mean, why bother when you've got a perfectly good explanation that doesn't involve guidance?
I mean, the point is, you use words
insert
like you use words like blind and automatic. This watch is blind and automatic, but it's been designed. The words themselves do not shut out that notion. And it seems to me that the impression I'm getting is that what's coming through is that the whole process is so sophisticated, it itself is giving evidence of a rational mind behind it. But am I understanding you right, that you say you deny that because you've an in-principle reason for denying it? That is, everything must, as far as you're concerned, go from the simple to the complex. And therefore, your major argument in the God delusion, if I understand it right, is that God is, by definition, more complex than the thing you're explaining, so he's got to be explained. Is that right?
That is a major point that I want to make. But let me go back to what you were saying before about guidance. When you drop a stone, it falls to the ground, and you as a scientist will explain that by gravity. You wouldn't dream of saying, oh, there must be a God pushing it down. That's exactly what you're in effect saying with respect to evolution. Because we understand evolution in just the same kind of level as rather better level than we understand gravity.
No, and this is a very important point, because I detected in many of your writings that you oppose God and science's explanations. When Newton discovered the law of gravity, he didn't say, marvelous, now I can know how it works, I don't need God. God is an explicator at the level of an agent, not a mechanism. So that we can study mechanisms in biology. The more sophisticated they are, the more that might well point towards an agent. You don't argue away the existence of an agent by showing that there is a mechanism. And I don't quite understand how you manage to get, if I understand you right, God and science as alternative explanations.
Well, I think you do get rid of an agent if the agent is superfluous to the explanation. That when you're studying something that's happening, there may well be an agent, and it may, if you're watching a car driving along and avoiding obstacles and turning left and turning right, you say there is an agent controlling that car, and certainly there is, there's a driver. But if you don't need an agent to explain what's going on, and we don't in the case of biology, and we don't in the case of gravity. Of course, I accept that Newton was a theist. He lived in the 17th century and everybody was. But you don't need an agent. An agent is a superfluous explanation. It's a gratuitous grafting on of something that you don't need.
Well, I find that unconvincing because even if you accept the whole evolutionary paradigm,
well,
it depends on there being a fine-tuned universe. And that fine-tuned universe raises in itself very big questions as to the origin of the universe. Evolution doesn't deal with that.
No, it doesn't.
Nor does it deal with the origin of life.
No, those are separate points.
Those are separate points, but they're vastly major.
Natural selection doesn't just work without guidance. It requires no guidance. It's a mathematical, testable process. For example, in Richard Lenski's long-term E. coli experiment, running for over 75,000 generations, scientists observed bacteria evolve entirely new traits without any designer. It happened through random mutation and selection. No intention, no foresight, just biology. Dawkins is also right to compare this to gravity. When you drop a stone, you don't ask who's pushing it, because gravity is a law. Same with evolution. Once you understand the process, saying, God did it, adds nothing. It's like explaining lightning by saying Zeus threw a thunderbolt. It's outdated. Religious arguments like John Lennox's often rely on the God of the gaps. They insert God wherever science hasn't answered everything yet. But science progresses. Religion stays static. Christianity used to say Earth was 6,000 years old. Now we know it's 4.5 billion. Genesis says animals were created all at once. Fossils show they developed gradually over millions of years. The Bible gets biology wrong. Even the idea of a fine-tuned universe falls apart under scrutiny. If it were truly fine-tuned for life, 99.9999999% of the universe wouldn't be empty space, deadly radiation, or black holes. And if God designed humans, why would we have vestigial organs like the appendix or eyes with blind spots?
Your points.
They are, yes. As long as we were dealing with evolution, I was talking about evolution. If you want to move on to talk about these other things,
I'd be very happy to move on, but the notion of things in principle going from simple to complex, and they must go that way, that seems to me to be your belief, your faith.
Well, things must go from simple to complex.
Yes.
No. I mean, if things go from simple to complex, we need an explanation.
Yeah, we
Natural
do indeed.
selection is an explanation for that. It's the explanation in the case of biology.
Well, let's go back to the level of the origins of the universe and the origin of life. Now, life, as we both know, has got this digital database. It's got a language all of its own. Now, the only thing we know of capable of producing language is mind. And yet you reject that. By definition, as an atheist, you must reject that. There's no mind behind this language.
I do reject it. When you say the only thing we know that can produce language is mind, I mean, we know that what produces human language is mind. Of course we do, because that's human language. But DNA is not human language.
Yeah, but
DNA
it's very sophisticated.
It's very sophisticated, but it doesn't follow that it has to be generated by mind.
But we know of no other conceivable way of it being generated. You see, because it seems to me from the mathematical point of view, I think you said this somewhere in a different context, junk in, junk out. Here we have this phenomenally sophisticated information processor, which is the cell. Am I really to believe that that information processing capacity simply came about by the laws of nature and random processes without a mind?
Yes.
Well, absolutely. I find that impossible to believe as a mathematician.
I know you do. This is called the argument from personal incredulity.
But I could just reverse that and says your position is the argument from personal credulity.
No,
that rationality comes from irrationality, that mind comes from matter. To me, the biblical explanation in the beginning was the word, the logos. That makes perfect sense. And it makes sense of the fact that we can do science itself.
But you haven't explained where the logos came from in the first place.
Well, of course not, because the logos didn't come from anywhere.
Well, then, in what sense is it an explanation?
Because the notion that you say you have to ask who created the logos, that says that you're thinking of a created God. The whole point about the God revealed in the Bible is that he was not created. He is eternal. He is the eternal logos. And I ask myself, as an inference to the best explanation, which makes more sense? That there's an eternal logos and that the universe, its laws, the capacity for mathematical description and so on, that these things are derivative, including the human mind, from the logos. That makes very much more sense to me as a scientist than it's the other way round, when there is no explanation for the existence of the universe. Do you just believe the universe is a brute fact?
The universe is an easier brute fact to accept than a conscious creator.
Well, who made it?
It's you who insists on asking that question.
No, you asked me who made the creator. The universe created you, Richard. Who made it then?
A God is a complicated entity which requires a much more sophisticated and difficult explanation than a universe, which is, according to modern physics, a very simple entity. It's a very simple beginning. It's not a negligible beginning, but it's a very simple beginning. That has got to be easier to explain than something as complicated as a God.
Yeah, you can't explain the existence of God, but I think you may have missed my question. I'm drawing a parallel. You see, you say that it's, at least, don't let me put words in your mouth, of course, because that would be unfair, but I'm getting the message that it's ridiculous for me to believe in a God who created the universe and me, because I have to ask who created God. All I'm doing is turning that question round and saying, the universe, you admit, created you because there's nothing else. Well, then who created it?
I understand you perfectly. I'm making the... We both of us are faced with the problem of saying, how did things start?
Yes.
I'm saying it's a hell of a lot easier to start with something simple than to start with something complex. That's what complex means.
But I don't think so. If I pick up a book called The God Delusion, it's a pretty sophisticated book. It's got lots of words in it. But actually, as I look at page 1, I don't even need to go beyond page 1, I conclude that it comes from something more complex than that book itself, namely you.
Yes, I mean, obviously complex things exist and brains exist.
Well,
and
why
brains
can
are
I not
complex.
look at the universe, the whole show, which includes
Well,
Dawkins and Lennox?
I'll tell you why. Because my brain that produced a book has an explanation in its own right. That explanation is evolution. We go back and back and back to the origin of the universe. That provides an explanation for complex brains, and complex brains produce books and museums and cars and computers. Of course we have complex things that produce other complex things. But science has an explanation for where complex brains come from in terms of simple.
John Lennox argues DNA looks like language, so it must come from a mind. But that's false reasoning. DNA is a chemical sequence formed by base pairs, adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine, built through physical and chemical processes. We've observed how simpler molecules, like amino acids, form naturally under early Earth conditions. In 1953, the Miller-Urey experiment showed that organic molecules could form from non-living matter in a controlled lab environment. No mind needed. He also claims information can't arise without intelligence. But that's wrong. Shannon. Information theory defines information as patterns that reduce uncertainty, not something that must come from a mind. Evolution creates new information every generation through mutation and selection. For example, bacteria evolving antibiotic resistance is new, functional genetic information, and it happens with no design. As for his idea that God explains complexity, Dawkins is right. inserting an unexplainable eternal being doesn't solve anything. It makes the problem worse. The universe can be modeled from a quantum vacuum, where virtual particles pop in and out of existence based on the uncertainty principle. This is observable physics. A God, by contrast, has never been observed, tested, or measured. Lennox quotes, "In the beginning was the Word," as if that explains the universe. But quoting John 1:1 doesn't make it true. That's theology, not evidence. There's no scientific data showing a divine logos created reality. It's an untestable claim. Christianity makes supernatural claims, virgin births, global floods, resurrection, that directly contradict what we know from geology, biology, and physics.
Beginnings.
I don't think it has at all. At the level of the origin of life, reading the literature, even the recent literature, the word miracle comes up probably far too often for your liking anyway, that they're just going from, say, the self-organizational properties of low-level molecules that you got in some kind of primeval situation to the phenomenal self-organizational potentialities of macromolecules. There's just no way you can get there.
Well, you're asserting that there's no way. We don't yet know what it is because there's a lot of work yet to be done. Science doesn't yet know everything. There are still gaps.
Yeah, but I'm not ruling out the fact that there's a physical side to it and so on. But it seems to me that the fact that the basic description of this ancient language, and it's a very ancient language of DNA, points much more arguably to the existence of a logos, a divine logos who started it, than the notion that it's going to be exhaustively explained in purely naturalistic terms. Because I would still go back to the point I made earlier, although I don't want to harp on it. This extreme reductionism removes from me the very rationality which we use to have the discussion. So that I'm not simply terribly tempted to believe it's all been designed. I believe it's all been designed, but that doesn't, and here's something else that I'd like to bring up in this, that doesn't stop science. I fear sometimes that your dichotomy, either God or science, might put some people off science because they prefer God, and that would be a pity.
Well, you're hopping around from one topic to another, but so we could do the origin of life, we could do the idea of miracles, the idea that somehow my approach to science puts people off. But, okay, let's do the last one then. When you feel like it, you will smuggle in magic. You will smuggle in magic for miracles in the Bible, you'll smuggle in magic for the origin of life. I can't explain the origin of life at the moment. I mean, nobody can, people are working on it.
But you believe that it will have a naturalistic solution?
Yes, I think that it is a cowardly cop-out to suggest that just because we don't yet understand something, therefore magic did it.
Oh, well, I would agree with that. I mean, the God of the gaps idea.
Well, but that's exactly what you're putting forward, the God of the gaps. You're saying, you're pointing to the origin of life, you're pointing to the origin of DNA and saying, oh, well, okay, Darwin's done everything after the origin of life, but he hasn't done the origin of life. No, that's the God of the gaps.
I think what I'm saying here is that there may well be two kinds of gaps. That is, there are bad gaps that science closes. But could it not be that science can open some gaps? Now, what I mean by that is this. Your assumption, as I understand it, is that there's going to be an exhaustive, reductionist, naturalistic explanation of everything in scientific terms. I don't think so. Now, if there is a God, and if he created this universe, and if, as I believe, he is personal, then I would expect certain things to follow. One, that I would see evidence, not proof, but evidence in the universe that God existed. I feel I see that in the mathematical describability of the universe, in the fine-tuning of the universe, and so on, and in the marvelous sophistication of the world. I'd expect to to see God's traces there. I would also expect that there may be occasions when God speaks in special ways, and therefore the more we try to analyze those things in terms of purely reductionist science, it'll get more and more difficult instead of more and more simple. I wouldn't expect there to be many of those places. I think the origin of life might be one of them. And certainly when it comes up into more recent history, you mentioned miracles. The thing that is central for me is the fact that what you call petty, and I feel is vastly significant, because it's touching on something that affects every human being, the question of death. Now, if Jesus really literally rose from the dead as a matter of history, that makes an enormous difference to our view of the world. And so far from being petty, if this is God speaking to us, then I want to take it extremely seriously. Why do you think it's so petty?
Well, of course it makes a huge difference if it's true. But
yes, exactly.
But you've suddenly leapt from sophisticated discussions of the origin of the universe, where one can have a proper discussion about whether some sort of cosmic intelligence could have set forth the laws of physics. And you suddenly jump to a man who lived 2,000 years ago, was born of a virgin, rose again from the dead.
Well, I only did that because you mentioned it first at the beginning.
I think that's petty. By comparison with the grandeur of the universe. I mean, to put my point again, do you really think that the creator of this magnificent edifice of the universe, the expanding universe, the galaxies, he really couldn't think of a better way to get rid of the sins on this one little speck of dust than to have himself tortured? He's the one who's doing the forgiving after all. Couldn't he just have forgiven?
Because this is a moral universe, Richard, and just forgiving doesn't make sense.
I mean, he has to kill himself in order
to... He doesn't kill himself.
Or get himself killed, tortured.
God sends his Son into the world to provide forgiveness and to provide a basis on which he can justly bring forgiveness to me. Now,
he has to get himself killed in order to do that.
Well, half a minute. We need to step back from this a little bit because it's actually a highly relevant topic. In your world, where is justice to be found?
Well, justice is a human construct of great importance in human affairs, and it's something that most of us have a sense of, which I think probably can be given some sort of Darwinian explanation, but I don't see where you're taking.
The RNA world hypothesis shows how self-replicating RNA molecules, precursors to DNA, could form naturally from basic chemistry. Peer-reviewed research from NASA, Harvard, and University College London shows that amino acids, nucleobases, and even sugars can form in space and survive planetary conditions. Life's building blocks don't need a miracle. They need time, pressure, and chemistry. Lennox brings up the language of DNA, but this is metaphor. DNA is not a human language. It's a biochemical sequence. Just like gravity or thermodynamics, it follows natural rules. Saying only a mind can write DNA is no different than saying only a mind can make snowflakes. It's false. His leap to Jesus' resurrection is even weaker. There is no physical evidence Jesus rose from the dead. The Gospels were written 40 to 70 years after his death, contradict each other, and reflect theological agendas, not historical records. The earliest Gospel, Mark, ends with no resurrection appearance at all in its oldest manuscripts. That's not reliable documentation. It's ancient mythology. Christianity says sin must be paid for with blood. But that's Bronze Age justice, not universal truth. Societies today have abandoned blood sacrifice because it's immoral and unnecessary. If God is all-powerful, he doesn't need to satisfy justice with violence. He could just forgive, like modern humans do. So here's the real question. If we've explained thunder, disease, and the stars without God, why cling to him for the origin of life or morality? Let us know what you think in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share if you believe evidence matters more than ancient stories.